I have here a Kylo Ren Legacy Lightsaber Hilt from Galaxy's Edge, along with a blade. And the two are connected. It doesn't look it because the blade isn't plugged in, obviously, but I have a little adapter here with some wires coming out to it, running off to the blade controller out of this blade, and then more wires running off of it back into the blade where the LEDs are. So the important thing that I'm trying to get across is that this blade behavior is completely stock, despite its unique appearance. What I want to do is I want to time how long it takes this Kylo Ren hilt to turn the blade off if I just leave it alone and I don't swing it around or do anything. How long before it shuts itself off? With a Savvy's Workshop hilt, it turns itself off after 2 minutes of inactivity. Is that the same for a Legacy? Is it more or less? Let's find out. And then afterwards, I want to see if there's a way to change that. So, what I am going to do here is first time how long it takes for the Kylo Ren to turn the blade off. And I'm going to do that with a stopwatch, which I'm going to use my phone here for. Alright, and try to get all of this in shot together. So I'm going to turn this on, I'm going to hit the start button, and we're going to see how long it takes before this turns off. And I will fast forward through most of this for you because this is just going to be boring to watch on its own. So, here we go. 3, 2, 1, start. Alright, that looks like it was 3 minutes. So this thing will shut the blade off after 3 minutes. My first thought is, what happens if I just disconnect the data cable after it turns on? The data cable in this case is this yellow wire. This is the wire that's used to send commands to the blade to have the blade turn itself on and off. So if I power this thing on, so it sends the command to turn on, what happens if I pull the data wire? Now, one thing that I know is going to happen is it's going to stop behaving in an unstable state. It's going to just be one solid color instead of blinking through different levels of brightness. That's because those different levels of brightness are being commanded by the hilt through the data wire which I'm pulling. So let's see what happens if I just pull the data wire. And I'm going to turn this on. I'll have to turn it off first. Turn it on. Pulling the wire. The blade stays on. The hilt is off. The hilt thinks the blade has been removed. So it made that noise of the blade being removed from the hilt. So now what? Now I want to see if the blade has some kind of auto power off feature. So I'm going to leave this disconnected, and I am going to time this off on the side. I'm going to give it, like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because to be honest, I don't think the blade has an auto power off, and so I'm not going to even bother recording this. I'm just going to let it run, and I'm going to go off and do other things, and after, like, as I said, like 10-15 minutes, maybe longer, I'll come back, and if this blade is still on, then I think I am safe in assuming that there is no auto shut off in the blade. It's all just in the hilt. And if that's the case, then we have one potential solution, which is find a way to disconnect the data wire between the blade and the hilt. Okay, so I'll go away for a little bit and we'll come back and see how it goes. Actually, before I do that, I want to show you something that's kind of interesting. Turn it on, like so. Pull the data wire. You can see that the hilt has shut itself off because it thinks the blade has been removed. Watch what happens when I put the data wire back in. What happens is when you plug in a blade, the hilt, the very first thing it does is it sends a shutdown command. It sends it twice, actually. So it's not a shut off as in animate a shut off. It's just reset the blade, turn everything off, and just reset yourself and get ready for some new commands. So that was kind of interesting. When you reconnect the data wire, the blade gets shut off by the hilt. Okay, anyways, back to figuring out how long this stays on without any interference from me. It is 20 minutes later, and it is still going just fine. So I think it is safe to assume that there's no blade auto shutdown thing. It is purely hilt driven. Therefore, if we can somehow block that shutdown command, we can keep the blade on indefinitely. And we can block that shutdown command by disconnecting the data wire going to the blade after the blade has turned on. So how can I do that with everything plugged in and connected? I need to think about that. So I need to add a switch. But where do I add it? Well, I add it somewhere along the data line. But where do I mount the switch? And how do I access it to trigger it after the blade is turned on? That's the hard part here. Now, I could put a switch, drill a hole here into the plastic down below, or mount a switch somewhere in here that I could turn it on or off. But when I plug the blade in, I'm not going to have access to this area. It's all going to be tucked down inside the hilt. So I would have to mount something around here, and you could definitely drill a hole here, mount a little switch, run some wires down, but the problem is the switch is always going to be visible. Now maybe you mount it in such a way that the switch is always going to be facing the wall. For example, if you're mounting this on a wall, and that would work fine. You could grab any kind of toggle switch, slider switch, whatever, and mount it here. You're all set. But I would like to keep things looking as stock as possible. So what other options might I have? And that is what I want to look at here. I have a multimeter. It's in continuity mode. And I've got a couple of leads here that I can plug stuff to. For example, this is a reed switch. It's a little glass tube with a couple of strips of metal in between, and I believe they are normally connected. Or maybe not. Normally disconnected. And then if I find a magnet somewhere, bring it close. I have a connection. So, and I think these are somewhat directional too. I'd have to experiment a little bit with it. Maybe I grab a more powerful magnet like this. This, by the way, came out of a hard drive, an old, like 3 1/4, 5200 RPM old school hard drive. They have a couple of really powerful magnets, this little piece here inside. So I salvaged those magnets, and that's pretty powerful. I can trigger this from, I don't know, a half-inch away, it seems. Maybe more, maybe much more. So I could wire this up, and then using a magnet, hold the magnet, on the side here. That makes the connection, power the thing on, remove the magnet, and that'll disconnect the data line from the hilt, but the blade will stay on. So that's one option. However, the trick there is I'm going to need a really powerful magnet like this, or maybe even something more powerful, because I will probably put the switch somewhere here. So that's got to get through this layer of 2-3 layers of plastic here. and then the hilt, which is probably going to add another 1/2 inch to inch of thickness. So you need a really big, really strong magnet. The other problem is the hilt, depending on which hilt you're using, especially if it's a legacy hilt, that's metal. Is that going to disrupt the magnet? Is it going to block the magnet? Probably. So the reed switch solution isn't something I want to go with right away. I have another idea, and this is a kit. It's an hourglass kit that I bought off of eBay. I bought a few of them, and the way it works is you have a bunch of LEDs in it. You flip it upside down and it'll start lighting up one direction. You flip it around the other way, it'll start lighting up in the other direction, simulating sand through an hourglass, basically. In it has this, which is, I don't know if you can hear this, I'll shake it by the microphone. It has a little steel ball in there, and the way it works is tilt it in one direction, the ball is not touching anything. Tilt it in the other direction, the ball is making a connection between the two wires. It's a tilt switch. Well, what if I used this so that the data line is connected when the blade is in a certain orientation? Flip the blade the other way around. Now the data switch is disconnected. Okay, so it's hooked up to the multimeter in continuity mode. When the shiny side is facing up, we got a connection. When it's facing down, we don't have a connection. And we don't have a connection until it goes about roughly horizontal. So that's what we need to keep in mind when we figure out how we're going to orient this inside the blade base, assuming it'll even fit. So I guess it's time to take this apart and find a home for that tilt switch. Okay, so this white wire is the data line, and it connects right there. Looking at both halves of the housing here, this little housing. This housing right here, these two halves, this is where I need to find a home for the tilt switch. And do I go on the top side or the bottom side? If I went with the bottom side, the data cable would have to come down underneath. That won't be an issue. Into there. Do I have room for it to go? No, I don't, because the PCB is resting on this little shelf right here. So I think that means that I need to mount this on the top side. Where do I have room to mount this on the top side? It's going to have to go right here, right where that number 4 is. That is where this tilt switch is going to have to be mounted. And I think I have space for that. Okay, but now the question is the orientation. Do you mount your lightsaber on the wall with the blade facing up or the blade facing down? I think you mount it with the blade facing up. So I want this when the we're going to use the we're going to ignore this for a moment. If the blade is facing the camera like this, then I want it to break the connection when the blade is facing up. So that means I need to orient this upside down like this, which means I need to orient this switch like that, or maybe at a slight angle. I can get away with something like a 45-degree angle here. That's not a big deal. And then I could have the stock data wire come up here to one lead and another wire come down to the pad here on the blade controller where the data wire is connected. Let me think about this, but I think that's what it's going to be. Okay, I don't know where I left off here because I forgot to hit record. I have the data wire coming up to the tilt switch, and then another wire going to where the data wire connects to the PCB. The next step is to figure out how this is all going to fit inside the housing, and then I'll add some heat shrink or Kapton tape to prevent any accidental shorting between here and the board. So in the end, I went with a little piece of heat shrink over there to protect the joints from shorting. Now I need to pack everything up. Okay, so I'm going to tuck this in. I want the silver side to be facing in the downward direction towards the end here. So I'm just going to sort of lay it up against this post here. Throw the top on, and that should hopefully hold everything in place. I could glue that down. I could use tape to hold it in place. You know what? I'm just going to, for now, leave it like this because this is just a test right now. I want to put the hilt back together now, or the blade, I should say, back together. And I want to try it out. I want to see if that's going to work. I'm not going to put the screws in, at least not yet. I don't have to. This thing will clip itself together and hold itself well enough. It's not an issue, not initially anyways. There we go, that's locked into place. Okay, let's see if this works. Here is the Kylo Ren hilt with the modified blade in it, and if I try to turn it on, nothing happens. That is because the orientation of that tilt switch that I put in there currently breaks the data line between the hilt and the blade. So the blade doesn't know, or the hilt I should say, doesn't know that there's a blade inserted, so it won't turn on. Now, if I rotate the hilt and blade, you heard the noise. The connection with the tilt switch was made. The hilt now knows that there is a blade there, and if I turn it on, it turns on the blade. Now if I rotate this back up, you heard the noise. The hilt thinks that the blade has been removed because the data line has been broken via that tilt switch. I can even turn off the hilt, and the blade stays on. And it will stay like this forever until the batteries run out. But that is one way that you could mount a lightsaber from Galaxy's Edge on your wall and keep the blade on even though everything else is off. Now, of course, this isn't going to work if you want the flickering effect or if you want sound, but at least it's a good first step. Now, if I turn the blade and hilt back upside down, the hilt recognizes the blade is there once again and sends it the off command, turning the blade off. And I can turn it back on. Rotate up like this. And now I have a blade that's always on. So there is a way to keep your blade on beyond the 2 or 3 minutes that the hilt wants to automatically shut it off. So it looks like the tilt switch mod was a success. The only thing to keep in mind is with the tilt switch mod, this blade can't really be used to swing the lightsaber around with because that tilt switch will keep triggering and it'll keep turning the blade on and off. So this is really for display only. If you only have one blade, you probably don't want to do this mod. You probably either want to find yourself a second blade, or you're going to have to accept that after you make this mod, you're not going to be able to use your blade to swing the lightsaber around. Or you could go further, and instead of using the tilt switch, you could actually just drill a hole through here, run some wires to a physical switch that isn't going to turn on and off just by the orientation of the blade. That's another option. But the hookup, the way I showed you is going to be the same. It's just instead of a tilt switch, you're wiring it to a physical clicky switch thing. That's the technical term. What else? Tilt switches. If you want to get tilt switches, you can find them on Amazon, eBay. They're everywhere. They're not very expensive. Pack of 10 or so will probably run you between $5 and $10, depending on where you look. You could buy them individually through sites like Mouser or DigiKey, but you're going to pay shipping and handling and other stuff, so you wouldn't buy just a tilt switch from those sites, which is why when I talk about buying parts for these kinds of modifications like resistors, capacitors, whatever, I always say go to eBay or Amazon, because you'll find bulk packs of those items for, again, $5 to $10, maybe less. What you would pay on just shipping going through DigiKey or Mouser or other places like that. So I've marked my blade, so I know that this is now the tilt switch mod blade. So I don't go and try to use it to demo, a full swing of a lightsaber or anything like that. I may actually, for me, revert this mod later on, just because I need blades and I don't have too many of them. So there you go. That is how you can modify a blade so that your Galaxy's Edge lightsaber, be it a Savvy's Workshop or a Legacy lightsaber, the blade will stay on after the 2-minute or 3-minute auto shut-off. Perfect for displaying your lightsaber. It is going to eat up a lot of battery, though.